Welcome to Journey Home to Self. This is a place for us to explore the milestones, the roadblocks, the pit stops, and the breathtaking sights on the most important journey of our lives. The journey of coming back home to you. My hope is that through the stories, insights, knowledge, and wisdom we share here, you get inspired and activated to widely fall in love with choosing yourself every single moment. I'm your host, Deepshikha Sairam, and I am truly so excited and honored that you are here. Let's dive in and journey home to self together. Hello, friends. Welcome back. Thank you for tuning in for yet another week. Before I introduce you to our wonderful guest for today, I wanted to take a moment to celebrate with you a couple of milestones for our Little Engine That Could podcast and share with you a few updates on what's coming ahead in our future. So first of all, celebrate with me because today officially we are releasing our 30th episode. Now, 30 may not sound like a big number, but to me, it absolutely is. When I think about the time that went in conceiving the podcast and the production and the reaching out to the guests and the recording and everything, 30 to me is like, wow, we've been able to do that since September. It just sounds so mind-blowing to me. The second milestone, which is even more mind-blowing at this time, to me especially, is that as of recording this introduction piece, we've reached about 1,900, almost 1,900 downloads on the podcast. And that number is just, it blows my mind. It completely does because, every time I start something new, whether it's a podcast or it's a piece of writing that I'm publishing or it's a program or anything, there's a little voice inside of me that says, nobody needs this. Nobody wants this. No one's going to listen to this podcast. And I'm sure that we've all had that voice. So every download, every listen, every share, every review is such a big encouragement to my higher self that created this desire to create the podcast. It is such a big hell yes to that part of me that knows that I want to do this, that this conversation is required, that this creation fills my heart with so much joy. And none of it is going to be possible without you. Without you listening, without you sharing, without you leaving a review, it's just not going to be possible. So I am so thankful. I am so honored that you tune in week after week to listen to our podcast, to share it with your friends. Please keep doing that. And if you haven't left a review yet, we would love a review from you. We would love to hear what you like about the podcast. If you have any suggestions that you want to send us, send it to us at hello@journeyhometoself.com. We would just love listening from you. So on the behalf of the entire production team of Journey Home to Self and everyone who's involved, including our wonderful guests in getting these episodes to you, I want to say a big thank you for tuning in every single week. Now, whenever I start a podcast, I don't really think so far ahead. Or actually, whenever I do anything, I don't think very far ahead. So when I started this podcast back in September and conceptualized it even way before then, I was like, let's just keep going. Let's see where this goes. I didn't really have a specific strategy in mind. That's really not my style to do things. But I said, let's just do this. This is calling to me. So today, not only this is our 30th episode, but this is also our finale for our season 1. And like I said, when I started this, I wanted to just keep going. I didn't really think about, will we have seasons? Will we have these many guests? Will we do these many solo episodes? I didn't have all of this like in a solid structure. But one of the things that I have had to separate myself from these past few years is the narrative, is the ideology, is the philosophy of always being in production. I think the world has told us that we always have to create an output, no matter what's going on in our life, no matter what the seasons are. And we always have to operate at our best abilities and have the highest production possible. And our life is like a factory where we are just producing and producing and producing 365 days a year, week after week. And that's something that I've had to separate myself from, because not only do I realize that we are not meant to do that, because we're not a factory, we are human beings. We have periods and cycles of rest that we need. We have periods of low energy, low output, high output. We all have our different energy levels. We've talked about that in our human design episodes, and it's just not possible. It's something that we really have to consciously think about in our lives and how we do things, our work, going out, taking vacations, periods of rest, whatever it is that we do. We really have to be conscious of the fact that we are not in a factory. We're not in a factory lineup creating products one by one, stamping things and packaging things. We're human beings, right? So when I thought about the podcast and where we want to take it the last few weeks, I really had to extend that ideology on everything that I'm creating as well. That includes the podcast too. I cannot have the podcast run on a different core value and my life run on a different core value, right? So we've decided that we will create seasons. We will have gaps in between. During those gaps, we're going to reset. We're going to think about what topics we want to talk about in the next season. We're going to think about and be very conscious about the guests that we are inviting, about the stories that we are putting out there. And that is the main reason why we wanted to do seasons. And the reason that I want to share this with you is perhaps, maybe you've been thinking about this too. Or if you've not, maybe this is your sign to think about your life, the way you approach work, the way you approach your social calendar, or anything in your life in terms of seasons as well, because we all have our own winter. Some of you might be exiting your winter right now as we actually approach spring, and you might be in a cycle where you want to flourish. Some of you might have flourished during the winter, and now you might be approaching your deep rest. Some of you might be in a fallow period. Some of you might be in a regeneration period. We all have different cycles, and it is so required now, not just for ourselves, for our peace, for our joy, for our higher selves, for our entire nation, for our entire world, to honor those cycles. And the more and more people who do it, with the concept of emergence, we impact more people. And I honestly believe the world is going to be a different place when we are all honoring our cycles of rest and work. We are nowhere done. We are coming back with another season. We will keep you posted on when our season 2 will be coming back. There are so many topics that have been, circulating in my soul that I want to talk about. And when I think about Journey Home to Self, it isn't just about what are the things that makes it possible to align with the highest self most of the times, but also what are the things that stops us. What are the roadblocks? And often those roadblocks, often those challenges also have, a shadow side and a light side. Those challenges, if we flip them, they become our portals. They become gifts on our journey home to self. They become our superpowers. I've talked about this in the podcast before, that I look at this as gaming, even though I don't game. But it's like every level you slay a monster, but you also get like a superpower, right? So some of the topics that I've been thinking about, and I would love to hear from you. I would love for you to email us at hello@journeyhometoself and tell us, what are the topics you want to hear? Are there any specific guests you would want on the show? Do you want to be on the show? Do you want your experience, your story, your wisdom, your expertise to be highlighted on the show? Email us. We're looking for guests for our next season. We are looking for topics to be covered in our next season. So we would love to hear from you. But some of the topics that I've been thinking about that I don't hear often, honestly, is grief. What part does grief have to play in our journey home to self? What role does it play? And can we talk about topics like perfectionism? Can we talk about topics like how hard it is for some of us to know that we belong? And without belonging, what's the correlation between belonging and being our highest selves, being our best selves? And can we talk about what impact does being on this self-discovery, being on this journey, being committed to becoming our higher selves have on our relationships, on our friendships, on our relationships with our partners, with our children? How do we get them on board? And can we also talk about some things that take us off again and again? I want to hear conversations on PMS. I want to hear the conversations on premenopause. I want to hear conversations on menopause and how that affects women and how that becomes almost like a roadblock, and maybe other discussions on using our voices and money, which is always a discussion that we can have many times over. So these are some of the things that have been circulating in my mind, that how do all these topics impact our journey home to self? How do they stop us? How do they take us off course? How do they give us a diamond, give us a gift so that we can create another superpower? How does it get us closer to our higher self? And I want to talk about these topics. So again, if you have any suggestions, then please email us. The email address again is hello@journeyhometoself.com. If you are someone who is an expert in any of the topics that I've talked about, reach out to me. Reach out to me on email. I am not much on Instagram or Facebook, unfortunately, but I am on email. So definitely reach out to us. All right. So we're going to come back with our next season. We also might have a few mini-sodes in between. So they're not going to be full episodes, but just updates on what we're doing. Maybe if I come up with some aha moments that I know I want to share with you, we might create some mini-sodes for you. So keep tuning in. Of course, if you're subscribed to the podcast, please do that. If you haven't done that, you will know when our mini-sode is out. We might even do a few kind of like going back to the episodes that we've done in the first season and elaborate on that. All right, so let's get into our season finale of season 1. Can't believe I'm saying that. I am so excited to introduce you to our guest for today. Keep listening, keep tuning in, keep sharing with your friends and family. If you haven't left a review, please do so. And also, we are on Substack, which is the written version of the podcast, and we have different write-ups there. I write there weekly. If you want to follow us there and stay in touch and read about some other different topics that I write about weekly, then I would absolutely love to have you there as well. We'll put the link for our Substack in the show notes and also the email for you to get in touch with us. All right. Thank you again for listening in. Let's go in our episode 30. Oh my God, I am so excited for today's episode because this is something that I've been wanting to get into for so long. I feel like I've read every piece of Instagram post about it. I've subscribed to different astrology podcasts and apps, and I still haven't nailed down my moon cycle. Like, why do I feel like shit? Sometimes on full moon and sometimes on new moon, sometimes on both. I feel like I just lose it. So today I have my friend, Licia Morelli. Oh my God, I'm so excited to welcome her. Licia is the best-selling and award-winning children's book author of The Lemonade Hurricane and I Am Down Tough. She's also the founder of the Nocturne, a mini magazine where you can go to discover how to live in the cosmos as a creative human. Licia's writing has been featured in Vanity Fair, Main Media Magazine, Elite Daily, Bustle, and more. When she's not writing, she's hanging out with her family on the coast of Maine where they live. Licia, welcome.
Oh, hello, Deepshikha. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so happy to see you again. I know we've been in touch on and off. Licia and I have been part of, similar communities, but for a long time I haven't seen your beautiful, lovely face. So I'm so excited to just catch up. And I feel that it is so auspicious that we are recording this episode on a very important full moon or a very auspicious full moon. Am I right?
It's true. It's really true. Like there couldn't be better timing,
It
Deepshikha.
couldn't be better timing. So, Lucia, I just want to straight get into it. I feel like I need to commit myself to an asylum once every month at least. And sometimes it's in a new moon, sometimes it's in a full moon. And I know that a lot of people feel the same. And I don't think I made this connection before in my life before I was woke, but now I am. So I've made that connection. And I remember I was in a mastermind and I was talking about how terrible I felt on I think it was a full moon. And they said to me that don't give your power away. Like, don't give your power away to full moon. I was like, shut up, bitch.
Don't give your power away. Okay.
I'm not giving my power away, but I can't deny what I'm feeling.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Oh.
So why does, certain cycles, certain full moons or new moons affect us like that?
So I love this question because I think it is something where I always encourage people to, as Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche always said, notice what you notice, right? So the moon affects the tides. Scientifically speaking, it's brighter in the sky, so we're sleeping less or we have more energy because it's awakening us because of this, you close up your lights at night and your room is still like fully lit, right? So we have to think about it just even from that standpoint where we are noticing that maybe we're having a more restless night of sleep, or maybe the tides are higher because it's a full moon. Well, if we're made up of mostly water, wouldn't that affect us, right? Like, wouldn't that have something to do with us?
Totally.
Right? I don't know. But instead of saying like, oh, this is why this happens, I just encourage people to say like, notice what is happening. So for you, you're noticing like, wow, the energy feels frenetic. It feels wild, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times what happens is that we are like whipped up in this energy that's around us, this illumination. The full moon's all about visibility. It's all about illumination. It's all about letting go and releasing. And that's the cycle. What are we noticing? Well, I noticed that I'm not grounded at all during full moons. I'm pretty spacey. It kind of gets a little, which then is going to create this feeling of chaos in my life because I'm like flitting from one thing to another. And I'm noticing that in the full moon. All my nursing friends talk about the emergency room totally full on the full moon, right? So we notice there's more energy happening, like energy gets whipped up. And so if we have anything that we're noticing in our own lives, like maybe we're reflecting on something that we need to release because it no longer works for us. Maybe we need to let go of old practices and invite new ways of being in the world. Well, that's also kind of emotionally upheaving, right? So you're putting all these factors together. Well, of course you're going to be like a wild woman because you're like, what is happening? All this energy is here. I'm thinking about things. Things are illuminated. And, then you've got to be like, all right, what am I noticing? I'm noticing my energy is whipped up. I need to do some grounding exercises. I'm noticing I can't pay attention. I need to ground, right? Like I need to get myself back to center. It's the same thing with the new moon. Like new moon is all about going inside of ourselves, right? It's about internally looking at what do we want? What are we trying to intend? But then we might be like wandering the halls in our bathrobe with our coffee in the morning, like unable to get dressed because we're like so busy being like, what do I need? What do I want? And so I just tell people like really pay attention to what's going on for you, especially in a creative way, what's going on for you during these times. And you'll start to notice the pattern. So like your energy of feeling, kind of wild on a new moon is probably palpably different than it is on a full moon. Because of course, in a new moon, it's darker. You're probably more sleepy. You're more quiet, right? Full moon, it's lighter. It's more outward. It's more energy.
Right, right. And, the contrary of, me feeling like shit on some new moon and some full moon is that there are also some periods where I feel so full of energy. For example, now that I'm reflecting, I like got so much done yesterday, and yesterday was the full moon, right? I remember reading a book called The Code Red by, oh my God, she is here, by Lisa Lister, and she talks about our bleed cycles, our menstrual cycles, and how even that can be aligned. It means something when you're bleeding on the full moon. It means something when you're bleeding on the new moon. And in the olden days, when women used to live in community and not, so spaced out that we do these days, women used to bleed together. All of them used to bleed together. And most of the time with the full moon, I remember I had this friend whose husband was in the Navy, in merchant navy back in India, and she went along with her husband and the other wives too. And when she came back, she told me, she was like, Deepshikha, we were on sea for 3 months, and every month on the full moon we would all bleed together. Like every month, like our cycles were so synchronized. So there is definitely, the power is there. We probably don't notice it before, but we notice it now. And what I know from reading your newsletters and following your work is that there are ways that we can kind of like align ourselves with the creativity of the moon cycle. So what are some of the ways that we can do that?
Yeah. So to your point too, with the full moon and the new moon and the cycles and the energy, I don't remember the source. I would have to look for it. But what would happen is that there would always be like one or two women who didn't bleed with the rest of the group, but they would bleed on the full moon. So the new moon women would all red tent, the book, The Red Tent, like they would all red tent together. Right. And then there would be the two women who weren't bleeding, or however many didn't bleed, and they would be the caregivers. And then they would go in the red tent on their cycle. So it was very interesting because there's always a sense of like, wow, what is the meaning of this? Am I holding space or am I needing space? Right. And so it's the same thing with creativity too, Deepshikha. Like when we are at work with our creativity, like you said, you had got so much done yesterday, right? When we have noticed in the months, like, because sometimes it takes a few months to really kind of get to know ourselves during it. And some months are just totally off the wall and we're not really sure what's happening. Right. But the majority of the time we can say to ourselves, right, I know during the full moon, I get a lot done and I'm very visible. People ask me to do things. I ask for what I want. I get what I want, right? On the new moon, I always feel like nothing's happening. It's very slow. There's no visibility, right? So how am I thinking about that with my creativity? Well, on the full moon, I'm thinking I need to put my work out into the world. I need to pitch magazines. I need to pitch editors. I need to send emails. I need to make myself known. I need to talk about it on social media or in my newsletter, right? I'm putting myself out there. On the new moon with creativity, that's the dreaming time. That's the inward. What am I brainstorming? What am I writing about? If you're a painter, what are you painting? What sketches are you making? What are you doing to kind of get the ideas going? This is not a time to be talking about your work. It's not a time to be pitching your work. It's a time to dream your work into being. So when you start to kind of think it on the most basic level, new moons, going inward and begin brainstorming new ideas and begin starting new ideas. Full moons, put those ideas in the world as they're completed, right? So on a even more basic level, on a new moon, you're brainstorming story ideas if you're a writer. You're brainstorming magazine articles if you write features for magazines, right? You're brainstorming new ideas for poetry, right? What do you want to be thinking about? You're reading, you're watching movies, you're consuming other art to help with that. On the full moon, you're saying to yourself, okay, what do I need to finish? And what do I need to let go of? You're also saying, what don't I need to work on anymore? What's dead in the water, right? I'm just getting this off my desk. It's not going to linger. We're not going to hold on to it for 3 years. Like it's going in the drawer. It's never coming out. Same thing with painters and musicians. It's the same type of thing. You're dreaming into being on the new moon and you're fully putting it out into the world on the full moon.
I love that. And it is such a different way to work with your creative cycle because I feel like we have two camps. There's a camp of people who feel like they're not creative at all, like they don't have any creativity in them. And then there's a camp of people who know that they're creative. They know that they can paint, they can sing, they can write, but they get frustrated when the creativity is not at the same level. It's not consistent at all time. And when you talk about it in this way, it almost gives creative people permission to, not be so hard on themselves that they have to produce all the time. Like imagine if someone who is like Leonardo da Vinci, if he only like painted and produced masterpiece Mona Lisa after Mona Lisa every day, then there wouldn't be the Mona Lisa that is at the Louvre, right? Like, we have to give ourselves time to go in and even think about like what are we dreaming up, or assess like, did that work? Did that not work?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think about when I was getting my MFA, we did this cycle where every month we would have to hand in a writing packet. And so for the first half of the month, I would be in a panic because I would be reading. I would be consuming information and I would be like, I'm never going to be able to write. I'm never going to have any ideas. I'm not going to be able to sit and like write new things. And then it would be like a light switch. And after I consumed all this other art, looking at art, reading about art, reading books, reading fiction, reading nonfiction, like as I consumed, suddenly there was a light bulb that would go off and I'd be able to sit back down at my desk. And I think a lot of us don't, especially in the creative world, like you're saying, if we feel like we constantly have to produce, there's no time for information gathering to inspire. We still have to have that inspiration. And I'm not saying that you're not going to be producing a lot or you're not going to be working on producing, but I used to have to remind myself that reading was part of my production. That was actually step one to my creative production, or going to museums, looking at art. That was step one to my creative production. So for like a painter or sculptor, somebody like they're going to look at other art to then be inspired to produce new art. And you might be inspired the same day, but the point is that you're constantly having to remind yourself, you got to feed yourself in order to produce. And that's the nature of the new moon. And again, it's not that you won't produce anything on the new moon or the full moon, or like you're only going to be visible on the full moon. You might actually produce something pretty amazing on the full moon, but you've set yourself up to notice your energy for consumption and production as a creative person.
Yeah. And it's like, it's too much of one thing would impact the other. Like too much consumption would impact the production or the inspiration, and too much production would impact, again, the inspiration and the consumption. I love that you said that. And I hope the listeners are able to even see it and how they can create that balance in their life. I'm in a creative writing program right now. And the number one thing that we have been asked to do, of course, it's not like a rule, but we have been offered to do, is read. That's the number one thing. Like even less than you don't write that much as you read. And I have made the connection that when I read more, I write more. When I'm reading and I am looking for where the work is solid and how can my work be better because of that, I am becoming a much better writer. So I absolutely attest to this working.
Yeah. And we're smarter. I mean, like, let's just name it. When we're reading, we're smarter. Like social media is not reading. Like that's not reading, Think about when you're talking to somebody and you've just read a bunch of articles, in a newspaper, and you've also read 2 fiction books, and you've consumed a podcast, right? Like suddenly you have all this stuff in your mind that you're able to bring to a conversation that's not bite-sized, that's not like, hooked and then gone on social media. And like and this is why at the Nocturne, I have book recommendations and like a bookshop on bookshop.org, because I want people reading. I want you thinking, right? And it's also why I use art from artist friends I know as the feature image, because I want access for people to see things that might inspire them as they're then reading about the moon or reading about whatever it is the topic is about. I want that access point so that it's an easy leap from, oh, it's the full moon, or, oh, it's the new moon. Oh, here's a book I could actually just put on audio and start listening to this moment, or order, and I think that is what gets the thing going, is the more you consume. Now, we don't want to avoid, right? Because that also can show up as an act of resistance when we're like, well, I haven't read enough. I can't write, right? Well, that's, you get slippery slope. But when you're like full, you can feel it. And it's also a full moon. I'm going to put some stuff out there. Then you start to match up your energy.
Yeah, so true. So true. And yeah, of course, and we've all done that. And it's okay that if you're doing that, you right. consume so much and there's this resistance. But I always feel that there is an internal editor that lives in all of us that will come up and say, that's enough. That's enough. You need to go and do something about it. Yeah. Right. Awesome. So tell us a few action items, any rituals or tips that can support creative people in bringing up their work, or, balance the consumption and the production.
Yeah. So, okay. So for the full moon, action items that you can do as a creative are take an assessment of your current work and what you need to let go of. So if you think about creativity, I'll use painting as an example. If you're a painter and you've been working on a painting and then you put it aside and it's just in your studio and it's just hanging out and you're like not inspired to work on it, and it's been 3 months, you can let it go. Another painting will come. I promise. So the full moon would be all about releasing work you're no longer working on, right? Release it, because we all know that feeling of the muse hits, we get started on something and then it sort of disappears, it fades because we explored it, but it's not quite right. You can let that go, right? But if you're still tinkering with something, or you're still kind of looking at it or working with it, even if it's just a little bit, keep it. It's the stuff that you aren't working on at all. That's when you let it go on the full moon. Another thing that I tell people to do on the full moon is share your new work with trusted friends. Start conversations about it on the full moon. Get feedback, but not feedback of it might be too soon for feedback, you should fix this or you should do this. Yeah. And more of hey, I really enjoyed this. This is what I like. So you can keep going. So that's another thing I tell people to do on the full moon for their creativity. And then also I tell people to, if you're trying to get an editor, or you're trying to get a gallery, or you're trying to get an agent, research these people on the full moon. Research where you want to be and start to put, because it's all about action on the full moon. And then for a small ritual, nothing too complicated. And I always tell people, you can celebrate the full moon or the new moon 3 days before on the actual moon itself, or 3 days after. You have an entire week of this energy, because people are oh, I missed the full moon. It's no, you have the whole week. You can make time where you need it. And so what I tell people is on the full moon, you can simply light a candle. You can get out your journal and a pen, and you can, if you have incense, light some incense, or I usually just say grab a piece of chocolate, because that's the last thing you're going to do to close the ceremony. But what you want to do is light the candle. Then you want to write gratitude. What is working? 10 gratitude statements of what's already working, no matter how small, in your work. So let's say one of the gratitudes could be, I am so grateful that I have spent time reading this month so that I could write more, right? It could be as small as that. It doesn't have to be big sweeping gratitudes, but you're writing a gratitude list and you're sort of letting the universe know, I am so happy about this. And then the second thing to that ritual would be noting what you're releasing and what you want to make room for, right? So now you're starting to move towards the new moon at the end of your full moon ceremony. You're saying, I've released this so that I can make room for this, right? And then after that, you can, we were joking earlier, you can either burn it, right? And let it go back up, or you can just leave it, eat your chocolate, end it by saying, so mote it be, or may this be true, right? and then blow out the candle. And it's as simple as that, right? That could be your full moon ritual. But what you're doing is you're naming what you're grateful for, what's already working. You're talking about what you're releasing so you can make space for what's going to be your intentions. And then on the new moon, you're going to pick up with what were your intentions that you're working towards on that full moon. You're then going to write statements of actuation, right? So you pick up on those intentions. You say, this is my intention for the new moon. You still light the candle, you still eat the chocolate, right? But the second piece to that ritual would be I am statements. Like you are present moment doing the present moment thing, right? Even if it's not happening, you're writing statements as if they're already happening. And then you're keeping that and blowing out the candle and eating the chocolate, right? So it's just two very simple things to keep you on track of your work, and they do match up. So it's a bridge between the two all month. So you're thinking about that on the full moon, and then on the new moon, then on the full moon, then on the new moon. So it's constantly in motion.
Yeah, I absolutely love what you said. And so simple and can be done by everyone. I want to point out one thing here because this is how I used to think before. I was like, oh, why do I have to light the candle? Why do I have to eat the chocolate? And what I understand now, since I've been in the priestess tradition and learning the art of ceremony, is that a can these are like bookends to a ceremony, right? So we want to focalize the energy that we want to create into that container that we're creating. So a candle is placed, is lit so that we can focalize our energy, our intentions into that. And then at the end of a ceremony, we want to celebrate it. Right. So if we were doing it all together, we'll probably have a cacao, a cup of cacao, or we'll just pass on chocolates or something sweet. But if you're doing it alone, just eating that piece of chocolate, or it can be anything, it can be something sweet or something that you like, something savory too. But it's like a celebration. It's like bookend. Like now the ceremony has started. We lit the candle and now the ceremony is over. So that the universe also knows that, oh, the intention is focalized and the energy is focalized. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes. And that's such a great reminder. It is a bookend. It's creating a container. In the Shambhala Buddhist tradition, there's a word called drala, and it's setting the container for magic. So if you want to think about the lighting of the candle and the eating of the chocolate or the cacao, right? That's setting your container for the magic. And maybe it's magic outside. It's not usually magic outside. It's usually magic inside, but the environment is set up to invoke that. Like it's like saying, like you're saying, hey, I'm here. This is it. I've contained it. And also, when we live in a world, as I just watched the Chris Rock special on Netflix, he talks about that we're all addicted to attention.
Right.
Well, it's true. And so if we can give attention to ourselves and turn that, instead of being outward, looking for attention to outward or looking for validation to outward, if we turn that into ourselves and make a statement of bookends and saying, this is the container of attention that I am giving myself, well, guess what? We have just fed ourselves in a whole brand new way. And I think that will start to change how you work with the energy too. And it will give you more confidence to say, like, I know myself, I know what I'm working towards in my creativity, and I know what it feels like when I honor that.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that you talk about also is that when you align with your creative cycle, with your creative process, and it's going to be different for everyone, right? So my creative cycle in a new moon to a full moon period might be different than yours. We're also kind of avoiding burnout. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so this too kind of piggybacks off of what we were talking about when we're honoring that sort of new moon internal sort of quiet, more dark time in the night, and we're reading more or consuming more or looking, we're not outputting. So think of, if everybody sort of like thinks about how they feel when they've put too much energy outward, like you're grasping, right? When you feel strung out because you're like outward, like you feel cruddy, like it's like an internal, like you need a scrub internally. So when we follow the new moon and say, okay, during this time, during this week, I am specifically focused on reading more, journaling, being more internal, consuming inward, right? Getting massage, whatever it is, right? Doing our toes. Like I am going inward. Then we automatically give ourselves a rest. We're not suddenly like constantly on output. We give ourselves a rest. And so it's like, oh, by the time the full moon rolls around and it's time to put ourselves out there or do more, then suddenly it's like, oh, well, I can because I took a nap essentially. Like
Yeah.
I think about it on the most basic level of like burnout happens when we feel like we have to produce for other people all the time.
Mm.
So when we turn it back to ourselves and say, my creativity comes from me, then we are creating in a cyclical way because we know when we're ready to create. But if we're constantly on output, and social media kind of does this, like it's like a constant output, that's going to take away from our deep creativity, right? Like, so we really want to make sure that we're focused on how do we give back to ourselves so that we can create consistently. And I'm not talking about not creating during the whole, I mean, we still have to wake up and we got to do the work, right? We got to, if we are working, I wish I could say that I can take time off all the time. Like it's not happening. But we can be very specific about what that looks like. So, maybe we have meetings on specific days. So we put that outward energy on a day that is like, okay. Or we say we don't have meetings every Friday morning. We save Friday mornings just for ourselves. But we're constantly looking at the energy of inward versus outward, new moon versus full moon. How do we do that in our daily life?
Yeah. And I think how I understand this, Licia, is also not avoiding what your internal states are essentially talking to you about. So if I can think back to a time in my life, and this has happened various times, but very recently, and I can't remember whether it was the new moon or the full moon, but I just felt very, very crappy. And I had a lot to do on my plate. I had podcast episodes to record. I had like meetings to attend, but I was feeling crappy and I could feel myself, like, how like it was all coming up. And in my office, I just laid down and just took a few deep breaths. And after that, I was sobbing. And I did that for maybe like 20, 30 minutes. And then I got up and I was able to bring myself back. It's also like, there is something that's calling to our attention. But when we avoid it, then it's like we're feeling crappy, and then we are putting that crap is overflowing in our work, in our output, and then we feel even more crappy. It's like, we think that we are not living cyclically, but we are.
Yeah.
But it's about living cyclically intentionally, aligning your creative process with your internal states and the moon cycles, or you're living cyclically by the trauma of your past, or by the feelings that are literally holding on to you, to your psyche. So we are all living cyclically. I don't think we have any control on that, but it is, are you living with intention, or are you not? That's how I think about it anyway.
Yeah. And I think too, to your point, like it's okay to lay down on your floor and have a good cry and then wake up and then get up and be like, all right, onward.
Yeah.
Like sometimes that's just the way it goes. You know what I mean? And I think also when we can honor this idea that our days are cyclical, right? Like I know for me, if I have a lot on my plate and I can't concentrate, I pick 3 things to get done that day, just 3. Like if I get those important things done that day, then I have won and everything else is gravy. And I know the time in which I'm going to get it done is between 9 and 11, and I'm going to be really great. And then at the rest of the day, I can kind of like dial it in, right?
Yeah.
But I think we have to sort of, the moons are also going to show us where like okay, I'm prepared. I'm going to be a little spacey this week. I know it. And I'll just watch myself. I'll watch what happens. Just as like our own personal science experiments. Like we have a hypothesis. I might be spacey on the new moon. Let's see what happens. Right. And then we know, and then we just sort of note it like, wow, today was hard. I wasn't able to concentrate, but tomorrow will be better. Right. I think that's also we have to remember that too. Like creativity comes
Totally.
and goes. It's like a wave, it's sometimes it's high tide, sometimes it's low tide.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So if anyone wants to start aligning their creative process with the moon cycle, what would you say would be the first step that they should do?
Well, the very first step I would say is mark on your calendars when the full moon is or when the new moon is. And then the second thing I would do is don't set any expectations for yourself during that time. Just make notes each day, like 3 days before on the moon and then 3 days after. What came up for you? That's it. What came up for you? Because I think if you try to do too much too soon, it's a little confusing because then, like we were talking about, it's like so much pressure. Like, oh my God, it's a full moon. We got to, it's like, no, 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 no. Like, let's just notice what comes up. So I would do that for the first couple of moons. And then you start to see a pattern like,
Mm.
oh, okay. So for 2 months, 2 new moons in a row, this is what happened. All right. So how am I going to work with that? What works in my creativity? Like lounging, drinking tea, and reading a book on a Saturday is probably going to do me more good than trying to get myself on a podcast, like pitching a podcast or something. So you're just going to really pay attention. You're going to mark it on your calendar, and then you're going to pay attention to what you needed or what you did during those moon cycles, and then build from there.
Yeah, I am just so much in love with this. I feel like it's such a beautiful and I don't know, it feels like such a non-pressure way to build your career, your creative process, your life. I think we've forgotten that people used to live like that in the
You
olden
do.
days, and in some communities they still do. They
Yeah.
still very much follow the moon cycle. Thank you so much for this. So great. I know that the listeners would be like, okay, this seems easy and simple enough for us to do. Licia, before I let you go, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about the Nocturne. What is it? Where can we find out more about it?
Yeah, so the Nocturne is, you can find it at fromthenocturne.com.
Mhm.
And it is a mini magazine that covers the moon cycles, the moon phases. So each week you get a little podcast to talk about which moon cycle we're in, which phase we're in, how to work with it, what the benefits are. And then there's the magazine part, which gives you creative prompts, creative guidance, also writing tips, art to admire, books to read, right? So you're getting everything you need to really honor that phase of the moon. So it's like a one-stop shop for, just igniting your creativity as it aligns to that moon. And you can also find me on Instagram, just at Licia Morelli. And you can read more about my writing at LiciaMorelliWriter.com.
I love it. Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
sharing all that. I'm definitely going to check out the Nocturne. It seems like such a creative outlet. Like rather than scrolling on social media, I want to go on the Nocturne and get some creative prompts and look at beautiful art without leaving my home.
Yes, thank you. Yes, please do. And any and all feedback is welcome. And the nice thing about it is that it has a comment section, much like social media. So I really am trying to encourage a conversation of like when people read them, what are they taking away? What was helpful? So be sure to leave a comment when you're over there.
Absolutely, will do. Thank you so much, Licia, for your time and your wisdom. I can't wait for people to start using everything that they've learned. I am definitely going to do my full moon ritual that you talked about. I'm excited. Today is full moon. I haven't missed the bus. It's still within the 3 days of it.
Totally.
Yeah, I'm excited to do that. Thank you so much, Licia, again.
Thank you for having me, Deepshikha. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you liked this one or any other episode, there are 3 ways you can support us. Number 1, come home. Start your journey. That's literally the whole point of this podcast. To inspire you, to empower you, and to give you the knowledge and tools so you remember who you really are. Number 2, I'd be so grateful if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That helps us get in front of more people. Number 3, share it with someone, a friend, a family member, a loved one, a peer. You never know how much someone needs to hear this today. Thank you again, and until next time, remember, you're whole, you're enough, you're worthy, you are unlimited, and you are perfect just the way you are. I'll see you next time.